Welcome to This Month in Cyber for June of 2021. I think this is iteration number 60 or so of us coming together on a monthly basis to discuss things that might impact small and medium businesses with things that have been in the news or kind of top of mind items. An agenda today is kind of packed, but I'll say, we've got really three primary topics we're going to be talking about. We're going to spend a majority of our time on topic number one. This has been coming up with a lot of customers recently. The idea is cybersecurity insurance. What are some of the things we're hearing about it? What are these self-assessments that customers are being asked about? Ransomware sublimits, exchange. We've got some things that we, think are kind of normal, and then some things that are, wow, kind of interesting and kind of frontline stuff that I want to make sure you're aware of. Also, some discussions about multi-factor authentication. There's been some stories in the news, and just want to bring some things forward there, as well as obviously, can't pick up a trade rag today or a general newspaper even and not find some part of our infrastructure being disparaged. And so we've got some updates with regards to that. And then I just kind of threw in some additional ones at the end. So hopefully the agenda meets your expectations, and let's get started. On the cybersecurity insurance front, I guess a couple things I would put in bold. Number one is cybersecurity insurance premiums are going up. I've got some evidence in this regard, but in general, you're going to find about 15 cybersecurity insurance providers make up 92% of the market. This is a story we had talked about even maybe 6 months ago or so, but there's even a consolidation of those 15 providers. It's kind of more like 10 providers really at this point, as some of the others are either getting out of the business or others are acquiring their business. So there's a consolidation in the industry, and that usually it's no longer what I'd call a race to the bottom as it kind of was before. Secondly, it was a record year for payouts. A lot of ransomware, a lot of business email compromise, and as you can imagine, insurance providers don't like to lose money, and so therefore they'd rely on premiums to recover those costs. And then, I think another trend is the loose metrics that they relied on before, which usually was just revenue, possibly your number of records that you had as an organization. It's that, but now I think we're seeing it's also feedback on your controls that you have in place. They're now asking questions. So those are kind of three pieces of evidence I would give that cybersecurity insurance premiums are going up. We have a cybersecurity insurance provider that we'll probably have on next month to kind of have continued discussions in this market and give their view of things. But that's from my discussions with them, as well as reading the tea leaves and industry guides. Another thing that I point out is that renewals are becoming increasingly difficult. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm seeing at customers within our customer base, we're seeing organizations getting dropped. We're seeing organizations having to answer questionnaires or self-assessments. Specifically, I looked through about 12 self-assessment documents, and in fact, we wrote a blog on it. It's up on our webpage, and we'll share that shortly. Actually, the link is right there on the page when you get the copy. But these 5 are kind of must-haves. Every questionnaire is asking you, do you have it? And as we'll kind of get into, some of these questions are easy. They're, do you have it? Yes or no. Others are, do you have it? Describe it. Or do you have it? And then it'll ask you evidence about it. For example, I put a backup examples on there. Do you back up your systems? Yes, no. Probably an easy question for you, right? Yes, and you move on. However, if your provider is one of the more detailed ones, I think the example I'd give are your backups tiered to accessible areas of your network? Do backups require MFA to access? Is full restoration of key systems tested every 6 months? Those are direct questions that are asked off different questionnaires that I had seen. So it kind of depends who your provider is and what kind of questionnaire you're going to get, but that happens, I guess, is what it comes down to. These questionnaires are here to stay. One of the things I want to point out, obviously, is if you are in a position where you need assistance implementing one of these remediations, I'll call it, in order to satisfy your insurance provider. Obviously, your insurance provider is asking about it because they think it's a good idea for you to have MFA, especially for your administrators, maybe for remote access. We'll talk again more about MFA. They think it's a good idea for you to have security awareness. And there are programs that, you may have different flavors as to how you implement security awareness. Maybe it's lunch and learns that you're executing, once a month. Maybe you do phishing testing. Maybe you do training for those that are failing. That entire program can either be done by us or by you, but in any case, it's worthwhile to have a program like that and describe it. Patching and updating and backup obviously are there too. So we have solutions for that. I'll give you the URLs. By no means, I wanted it to be kind of graphical in nature, and I always hate URLs, but it's nice to provide it as part of the PDF so that you have areas to go to afterwards once you get the deck. From a insurance perspective, I guess I also want to let you know our organization has capabilities as kind of capabilities to do assessments in this space. And so we have, as I had mentioned, there are about 15 providers. We have about 12 of the providers' assessment questionnaires that they would ask, right, from some of the major carriers. Again, those assessments range from about 10 to about 30 questions. Some of them are easy. The easiest one I saw was 12 questions, multiple choice. And I'll give you an example what that sort of questionnaire might look like. This is a direct screen scrape, if you will, of that questionnaire. They're going to ask you how many records, do you have formal processes for backing up? And again, it's yes, no in this case. Do you use multi-factor to secure all your domain or network admin accounts? Hopefully you can answer yes or no to that. But if you can't answer yes or no to some of these simple questions, imagine when it gets more complicated, right? This is AIG's self-assessment response. This is a table of contents. It goes down to 1.28 because there are 28 questions there, and you might say it's more complicated, but essentially there's more answers that are needed, more evidence that needs to be provided, there's discussions about data classification and what security tools are you using and things like that. Some stuff's easy to provide, other stuff's like, I don't have data classification. We haven't covered that yet. I don't think it means necessarily that you're going to get dropped, but they may have a metric as to how your insurance rate is going to change based on the answers that you provide. We had a organization we're aware of that had to do a few projects in very quick fashion in order to keep their renewal going. They were getting dropped. They needed to implement MFA, and they needed to have security awareness in place in order to get renewed, and they had to show evidence that had occurred. So those were rush type projects that arguably you'd want to, if possible, do those projects in advance of cybersecurity insurance renewals. So top 5, again, was that list that I had provided. That said, I think that there were other areas that they were looking for. And when I said top 5, I saw some other commonalities when I looked across the 12 questionnaires. I was shocked, I guess, at some of the ways that they were very specific about things. And so I'll give some examples. The specificity included, hey, what did you do about that exchange event that occurred in March, and commonly known as Hafnium? For those that are aware, you have Exchange in your environment, whether you have a hybrid server and most of your stuff is off in Office 365, or whether you still have Exchange on-prem. The fact is they want to know specifically, what did your organization do to counter the Exchange Hafnium breach in March 2021? And then furthermore, they want to know who is the named person in your organization responsible for information security. So your answers to these questions were specific to riders that they would have on your policy regarding Exchange Hafnium and or ransomware. So there was different questions they would ask specific to ransomware, which obviously is where they're having to do a lot of payouts. So the specificity was really large in terms of some of the questions they were asking. They were also asking questions about vendor management and like, what do you do for suppliers and vendors, and what questions do you ask of them? Do you have an inventory of all the things that you're responsible for as security? Do you do encryption both at the desktop and data in transit and data as storage, things of that nature? So a lot of questions in those spaces. And again, obviously there were 28, 30 questions, but I tried to give you like a top 5 list of basics a top 5 list of kind of, I'll call it surprise areas in the specificity that they asked. They're good questions. But the other focus I thought was interesting is on the idea that, you know, we've been promoting for quite a long time, which is the idea that you can spend a lot of information or a lot of time and effort on the protection aspects of things, but they want to know about your ability to detect issues and to respond to issues. They want to know about your incident response plan. They want to know who's responsible for things. They want to know, you know, that you've tested these things, that you've tested your backup and recovery aspects too. So just keep in mind that we've got, you know, in the ransomware space, we've got a guide, I think that helps you in that regard. We've got things that can help cover you in the detection, response, and recovery buckets, should you need it also. All right, so I leave you with 2 things on insurance. The fact that, you know, we can do assessments and help you proactively determine the questions that you're probably going to get asked and get ahead of those. Start doing those projects now in order to satisfy them and to get lower rates. And secondly, obviously, the remediation of implementing those some of those technologies. We have you covered. We've participated, obviously, and furthermore, we've kind of worked with insurance companies. It's becoming a thing. When you have an event, there are 4 parties at the table, 5 really. Yourselves as customers, legal, your insurance, they're all kind of sitting right in the middle. Then there's a forensics team, and there's a recovery, IT recovery team. It could be your own team, but oftentimes when we're involved, it's obviously us and your team. And those 5 parties kind of come together and decide what's happening. And your insurance is a big player in that market. They're determining potentially who's being brought in. They're determining how fast things are at. They're determining how fast you can get back to business, right? They may slow walk you in terms of, oh no, we can't recover that system yet because forensically it needs to be evaluated prior to being recovered and things of that nature. No, you can't do your recovery yet, things of that nature. So we've got partners in all these spaces and kind of have you covered if there's a desire. No intention to self-promote travelers with the umbrella, just kind of happened to be wanted to let you know you were covered. All right, on a different topic, MFA. MFA, I'll give you some exact examples of some questions, and this kind of is a carryover, I'll call it, from insurance, but CNA wants to know, do you as an entity use multi-factor authentication to secure all domain or network admin accounts? Okay, direct quote. Chubb would like to know, does the company use multi-factor authentication for remote network access originating from outside the company by employees and third parties? Corvus, another provider, would like to know if your users can access email or web pages on a non-corporate device, do you enforce MFA? Okay, there were other questions that got asked too about employees, contractors, vendors, third parties, you know, and your MFA responsibility to them. And there's certainly were questions about and goals for organizations to do MFA upon login to Windows 10. We've got an organization we work with, mid-size, that wanted to provide a really easy experience for their customers where when they log into their Windows 10 device, that it actually was prompting them for MFA at that point. Now, a lot of people might point to Hello technology, which in fact I have on my device. I have a Surface Book here, but Hello is really more of a password substitution. In fact, it can be turned off, enabled on. You can have PIN codes as an alternative, but again, it's an alternative more than a second factor. So Hello really doesn't cut it. What we're talking about here is actually prompting the user login, password, and an MFA credential, usually based on either a token or based on a prompt on a phone to access the Windows 10 and then access all the applications behind it. So that's kind of known as device registration, and certainly there's some great technologies out there for making that true. So we did that recently. And I guess just in general, MFA can be very simple. You know, turning on MFA for admins, separating your admin accounts from your user account is a very important thing to do, part of the checkboxes. But those types of things are easy. Running a pilot for a couple of users, especially for cloud-based MFA, or web-based apps? Quite simple. What kind of gets more challenging, and not necessarily technically challenging, but is knowing, like, do you want to incorporate this with your VPN, which might include a radius server? Do you have conditional access, like certain situations where you do or don't want MFA turned on? Do you want this done at a device level, as I had kind of just mentioned? How are you going to train your users, and what's their experience going to be like? So kind of knowing what's possible is really part of the key. So that's about it on MFA. It's really a relatively straightforward technology, but it's becoming, kind of the gold standard as to how you really want to authenticate to especially key applications, remote access situations, contractors, providers, and so forth, and especially your admins. Little update on critical infrastructure. I shared this story, I think, a few months back when a pipeline down south, as you may recall, the Colonial Pipeline, was shutting down their systems, impacting fuel on the southeast, spike in gasoline, anarchy everywhere. But investigators did track down out of the 75 Bitcoins that had been exchanged, which at that time was around $4 million. The FBI got aggressive on this one and moved through a maze of about 23 different electronic accounts to track where the money went in terms of from dark side. As you know, electronic currency of that nature can get shielded pretty highly, but they tracked it down and they were able to recover about 64 Bitcoins, so almost all of it. Unfortunately, Bitcoin had dropped so much in value, it actually turned out to be about 2.3 million that they recovered. But DarkSide, the operator, the ransomware operator, is now shut down as a ransomware as a service. It's probably not going to have a huge impact over time, but I think it was logical to at least combat the efforts of some of these ransomware gangs who were kind of making out like bandits. And kind of along that lines, let's talk about some other things that are happening in the ransomware department. We have this new term that I thought I'd share with you. I haven't heard it a bunch, but it's starting to get put out there in some articles. So this essentially is, just think of it as ransomware for your embedded devices. You probably have cameras at home, you have cameras at work, you have things that are not running on Windows operating system licenses. Just look around you. You could probably find your lights might be controlled through an app, things of that nature. That means you have embedded devices. And there are today 10 times more devices that run those types of things, or IoT devices, than there are computers. And that's expected to go up, right? So this jackware, unfortunately, these devices are just as eligible for ransomware as anything else. So they play a critical role in infrastructure, cars, mass transit, healthcare, office buildings, and the home. Electronic control units in a car can cause the brakes to malfunction, prevent the engine from starting, can brick the car, can break a multi-million-dollar MRI machine. Subways might not be running. I'm spelling catastrophe, if you will, but just kind of imagine the possibilities, I think, is what we need to do at this point. And if you think it's far off, I guess think of it this way. In 2010, we had Stuxnet, right, which impacted centrifuges in Iran. And that was, the goal was targeted, and it was meant to impact those devices. Russia took down Ukraine's power grid in 2015. The Mirai botnet took down about 600,000 devices in 2016. In 2020, a TrickBot Trojan was updated to impact the BIOS of machines. So we're not impacting things at the operating system level. We're going a level deeper, which is exactly what embedded devices are. And then in 2021, I'll just kind of laugh as we kind of look at things like this, right? This just popped up literally yesterday. And I'm not saying that they're going to take advantage of it tomorrow, but no longer looking at the guests themselves. Now we're going to go after the ESXi virtual machines at a Linux level and try to impact things this way. Our Revil, which is one of the most notorious ransomware gangs, they're very good coders, is what it comes down to. And so when they promulgate a ransomware as a service like this, it's just a matter of operators taking advantage of this and being able to inflict harm in the future. So a little bit of doom, gloom and doom, if you will, but that's the reality as to what's happening. From a supply chain perspective, I thought it would be important to mention Microsoft. So supply chain is effectively the code that gets on your computer, and everyone has to believe that the code goes through a lot of testing and a lot of validation, if you will, prior to installation. And indeed, things like Microsoft here are responsible for signing this code, and then once they sign it, obviously it can go through the normal channels for installation. Well, Microsoft confirmed that indeed last month, mostly for gamers, would be impacted, but this was a driver called NetFilter that turns out to be a rootkit that basically was sending signals out to a Chinese command and control IPs. So they were listening, if you will, with regards to a properly installed driver on many gaming devices. Microsoft has not attributed this to a nation state actor list yet. The falsely signed binaries can be used to facilitate large-scale software supply chain attacks. So this could have been just a test to see, of Microsoft's code signing and so forth. But let's kind of remember Stuxnet again. Stuxnet was actually, if you looked into the story or did the 60 Minutes episode, I think there's an entire movie on it. But they actually they did some code signing under Realtek and JMicron to install it back then, which was popular software back in 2010. And then look at SolarWinds, right? So their SolarWinds incident that impacted the government, that was software that was legitimately installed on hundreds, if not thousands, of devices within Homeland Security and the CIA and others. So supply chain issues are here to stay, and where you get your software from matters. And there's not much we as end users, I think, can do about it, other than be aware that attacks can manifest themselves in a number of ways. So patching is critical, right? And to that point, I think I bring up something here that hopefully you already took care of. I'm not hopefully not creating any additional alert here, but I would think this will be our third iteration of discussing it. I think we discussed it at the very last this month in cyber. We sent out a emergency flare email to all of our customers about this, and I'll bring it up here again. This vulnerability for VMware is ranked a 9.8 out of 10 on the scale of issues. Fortunately, it only impacts organizations inside, so you can't get through firewalls to take advantage of this, thank goodness. But it is a very nasty item that needs to get patched right away. This was the communication that we had sent out. Towards the top, we had talked about some Microsoft Office 365, but at the bottom, discussed the VMware critical advisory. So those are the types of things that we're mindful of, and we'll try to make you alert of real time if there's a need, if we can't wait. From a remediation perspective, with all these things, whether it be ransomware or otherwise, I guess I just want you to, take comfort in the idea that your network is really simple, hopefully to you, and it's simple from our perspective. We look at it as workstations, switches, users, mobile devices, and computers. And we just need to know the number, and then you can apply services that are, going to help you protect your environment, whether that be, patching or antivirus or, port scanning, looking for URLs, things of that nature, detection and response. And some of the things that you need to be mindful of: what's going on in my Office 365, what's going on across my environment. I've got log files everywhere. And then, on the recovery front, certainly backup and more importantly, the ability to recover needs to be tested. Your incident response plan needs to be tested. And these are all things that we can certainly help you with. Blog-wise, again, we post 2 or 3 blogs a week. These are some blogs that were out there. VMware, we posted one on health diagnostics. It was one of our great engineers, Terry, I think, that produced that blog. We got a twofer on CMMC, both recap of a webinar that we had done. Hopefully you caught it, or rule on the interim rule, which CMMC is coming for those in the manufacturing space, whether you like it or not. It's going to impact you at some point, so it might be wise to be educated about it. We have some events coming up. Obviously, we always have on the third Tuesday this month in Teams, and on the fourth Tuesday this month in Cyber. So certainly look for that each month. But additionally, we have another CMMC webinar. We're going to be talking about manufacturer readiness and what you need to do to get prepared. Certainly, if any questions come up, we're happy to take them offline. And thank you very much for attending.